Welcome to this podcast and thank you very much for tuning in. Just to give a bare minimum amount of context before we get started, because Adam's going to cover that all as soon as we get going. Ellisland Farm came to the Stove with this really exciting opportunity to create a zine. And the zine was going to act as a handout for an exhibition that they were putting on at the farm called Beyond Burns, Ellisland's People. So for this podcast, myself and Korey from the Stove came together with Adam and Logan from Ellisland. And we basically just chat through the zine from start to finish. We go through each of the stories, we talk about the stories themselves, we talk about the research process, we talk about the illustration side of things, how we came up with the ideas for the imagery, and anything else kind of related to the creation of the zine. So if you do have a spare 40 minutes or so, please listen to and enjoy the following podcast.
Cool. So welcome to this podcast. We are from Creative Spaces and the Stove. I am James. I'm one of the creative spacers, working on a 10-month kind of creative internship thing at Creative Spaces. And this was one of my first opportunities to work on like an illustration commission. So yeah, it was a really cool opportunity. And I worked on it with Korey Patterson, who I'll pass over to now.
Yep, I'm Korey. I'm an illustrator working in Dumfries and Galloway, and I got to work with James on the zine for Ellisland. Beyond Burns, Ellisland's People was the title of that. And we worked with Adam, and I didn't actually know Logan was part of this until right now. But Logan, if you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Logan, and I am a volunteer at Ellisland. I took part in doing quite a bit of the research for the Beyond Burns Ellisland exhibition, looking into stories that didn't perhaps involve Robert Burns, which most people will know Ellisland for, but finding out a bit more about the extra stories that are behind Ellisland's past.
Yeah, my name's Adam. I was the kind of like, I suppose the curator. I think maybe curator is a bit of an outdated term, but like I kind of produced the zine and kind of organised the exhibition. In terms of the exhibition, it's probably worthwhile kind of talking about the reasons why the exhibition kind of came as a whole. It started as a project to kind of interpret the random farming equipment we had and kind of the history of Ellisland out with the context of Burns. Important things to note is that quite a lot of stories have been untold for so long about Ellisland. It's very Burns focused, which is, with great respect, but there's also really interesting stories that were to be explored. So with the help of Logan, we kind of did a bit of research on that and explored some interesting stories, I suppose. The zine was kind of like a little bit of an afterthought. It was meant to be kind of a take-home part of the exhibition to tie directly in. Time restrictions, I'm giving myself a little bit of leeway here, but the organisation wasn't as best as it could have been, and that was probably my fault. So we had to kind of reinterpret what the zine was actually going to do in terms of its purpose. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Cool. So we're going to open up the zine because we've got a zine in front of us. We managed to find one, and we're just going to open up and start chatting through the stories because that's the kind of main focus of this zine as a whole. Is really just actually focusing on the different stories to do with Ellisland's people. So we'll go for it. So as we open up, the first story is all about the Friends of Ellisland, and this is a funny one because this is actually a complete mistake. I mean, this wasn't supposed to be the story as you open up the zine, but it actually ended up being a bit of a kind of serendipitous thing where it ended up working out okay. This is actually a story that probably makes most sense to have as the mistake because it introduces something that's quite important to Ellisland as a whole, and I'll maybe pass that over to one of you guys because you obviously know a lot more about that than me. So do one of you want to take over just about this story here?
Yeah, I can go for that. Yeah, I think when we kind of thought about the zine and the exhibition, the kind of centerpiece way back when it started was that the Friends were such an important part of Ellisland for so long. Like they the site, looked after it so well, and maybe more importantly, like a big sense of community, which is what museums and stuff like that should be about. So that was kind of the central focus, was to kind of like pay homage to that kind of like sense of camaraderie that was part of Ellisland for so long. So yeah, like James said, it's pretty good that they're at the front of it, I guess. Even though it was a bit of a mistake, but that's also fine. Yeah,
it's good because like if that wasn't at the start, it would have been a story that did involve Burns. The first story was it was Burns and what was it? Moran. That's right. Yeah,
true. Yeah,
and and the title was Beyond Burns.
Yeah,
so.
then you see Burns straight away.
Yeah, no, right.
And yeah, I think that the fact that there was a mistake there was actually, it was about time, because it was maybe going too well.
Yeah.
Like me and Korey, this is the first time we'd worked on a commission like this.
A zine.
It's the first time we'd done a zine completely. I've never actually done an illustration commission before, and you've worked on commissions, but this type of project, it was completely new to us. So sort of that admin-y side of things and going back and forth and communicating with lots of different people and organizations was something that, it wasn't bound to happen, but it was not a surprise that maybe at some point there was going to be a mistake. It was just unfortunate that it was the last thing that happened.
Well, like you said, it worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
Everyone's really happy with it.
Exactly. So.
But yeah, also to have such an open brief was quite cool.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, we didn't have like too tying or limited instructions. It was quite good to have such an open brief and kind of put down whatever we kind of felt fitted.
Yeah.
I feel like it worked quite well.
For sure, because I think maybe I was concerned a little bit at the very start about, in my head, because all that I associate with Burns, I know it's not about Burns, but all that I associate with those types of stories is that classic traditional colour scheme and traditional way of speaking about things. And it was cool, really cool to know that we had a lot of agency, and just the fact that it's blue. That's cool. That's and I think it's cool as well, because I think actually there's this nice contrast between, I know it's something simple about the paper that we chose, but I feel like that sort of nods traditional to me, nods at traditional, and then we've got this kind of contemporary blue. I think it was just nice to have that artistic license and just to kind of get on with things, and for it not to be this super traditional kind of.
Yeah, but that was stated in the brief, wasn't it? It was like you wanted a modern colour palette. That's what you stated, and like kind of to go against traditional views, because the traditional view is all about Burns, and the sort of non-traditional view is to actually shine light on everyone else in Ellisland but Burns.
Yeah. No, it's actually good. I'm glad you said that in a way, because I think when we started it, in terms of producing the zine, I was quite like hyper aware of like what a zine actually is and means. The thought of putting a kind of decently sized production budget behind it to create, something that people make by themselves day to day with their own creative process felt a little bit like contradictory to me a little bit. So, to compensate for that, I guess, was to give you guys as much artistic freedom as possible. And then, also with the colour scheme and stuff, we're trying to, in terms of Ellisland, we're trying to kind of revolutionise and make the place seem a bit more up to date and contemporary as well. So it kind of tied in with that.
Which I bet is quite hard to do for a museum.
Yes, it's a bit of a struggle. But all credit to the board of trustees, especially the chair at the time, David Hopes. He was very keen for contemporary colour schemes and all that kind of stuff. So
I was going to ask about that. Was that something that you felt like you needed to push, or was that something that it was actually you were given the direction to just let them get on with it from higher up? Was it
they were quite keen to give us, especially with this kind of project, which is not part of a big massive redevelopment. It's a little bit smaller, but it still engages with like big funders. They gave me creative freedom. Obviously, I don't have as much creativity as you guys, especially in the traditional sense. But so basically, I just hired you guys to do all the hard work, and then Logan did all the. So I shouldn't do anything. I just got everyone to do stuff for me, and then got to take most of the credit.
Pen pusher.
Yeah, literally. But I'm pretty chuffed with how it came out.
So Friends of Ellisland is really something that's sort of, it's one of these stories that carries on today. It goes back in Ellisland's history, but it's also quite relevant today because it still exists. And basically, the Friends of Ellisland, which are a group of volunteers who basically have an input into the site and keep it running, basically. So they're quite an important part of the museum today. If we didn't have the Friends of Ellisland, it probably would be, quite difficult to keep going.
Have you had any sort of actual friends of Ellisland been in touch about the zine? Like, has anyone actually read it or said anything about it?
The zine, maybe not specifically. The exhibition, yes.
Right.
The exhibition was mainly installed, once again, what have I actually done? Was mainly installed by the volunteers, who two of which make up the majority of the volunteer team anyway. And they were part of the Friends of Patterson. So yeah, they were actively involved in the whole process, I would say.
Okay, that's good.
And is the Friends of Ellisland, is that something that it's now being given this label, but it existed before? Like, is this a group that could you have essentially called the people that have worked in and around Ellisland the Friends of Ellisland? It's just now it's got a label.
I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Because I suppose the people who keep it running are, Ellisland has had quite a history of people who have run it. Even people who are just tenants there have run it, and I guess in a sense they could be classed as the Friends of Ellisland. It is quite an interesting sort of. It is like a label. It's like sort of putting it in its place and sort of giving it a title. Rather than just having people, just doing something but not really being known for it.
Because essentially, every story here, it's really, if we're looking at it that way, every story here is the Friends of Ellisland.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
just that now it's this labelled group. Yeah, cool.
The Friends as a labelled group, I suppose, in terms of what the zine says as a date, they were like a specific group of volunteers. I don't know if there was like a kind of actual like kind of charity set up in the name of the Friends of Ellisland, but I know that's what they called themselves. There were also the Wednesday Gang, which was a group of volunteers who I think they still call themselves the Wednesday Gang. They still come on Wednesdays.
Yes, well, that makes sense. Wednesdays and Fridays?
Wednesdays and Mondays. And they still make up, or they were still part of the Friends of Ellisland as well. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Great. I guess we could maybe talk about the illustration actually as well, because we've talked about the story, the illustration as well.
Yeah.
So this was one that I did, and can I say that I'm not happy with it?
I think that's very natural. Very natural.
Yeah. I feel like I'm not so happy with it because I feel like the hands look very claw-like.
Yeah, but that's just being an artist. That's being an artist. Like, you're always going to look back at these things and think, I could have done that better.
But this was maybe the most challenging one to come up with in terms of how to illustrate it, because the others there was a sense of story, and this one it was probably one of the harder things for us to kind of understand exactly what it was all about, and it was not necessarily a story from start to finish with a middle and an end. It's like
non-specific.
Yeah, it's non-specific. So what was useful was that you guys sent us over some reference photos that were all in relation to like the competition, the clown competition, and so we just used that. We just decided on to use a bit of a motif from one of those, and I think it worked quite well.
Yeah.
So even though I don't like it very much, but cool. Right. Well,
next page.
So we've opened up and we're on the intro sort of text. Logan, do you want to maybe go through this a little bit?
Yeah,
because probably you that did it, not Adam. So.
Well, actually, it's actually me that.
Really?
Logan, go for it.
I was going to take credit there.
This is the one thing I did do. This is somewhat copy and pasted from the introduction panel as part of the exhibition. My thought for the exhibition was to start the exhibition by essentially killing off Burns, because then you go beyond Burns. So the exhibition starts with a film that shows kind of Burns' legacy and then him basically dying. And this kind of starts with that. Well, it starts with them leaving Ellisland to kind of set the tone for the rest of the thing.
Cool.
So similar with the zine, and then just kind of introduces
Yeah.
everyone as well.
Yeah.
Nice. Next one. So this story is Grierson. I can't remember his first name.
John Grierson.
John Grierson. I'll maybe start off. We can maybe start off just by going through the story. So maybe I'll pass it to you, Logan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so John Grierson was basically a tenant in Ellisland, and he was expected to run a museum in his home. But of course, John Grierson was quite I guess you could say he was quite a mischievous sorts. You know, he was basically, he got into trouble because he was basically turning away guests from seeing Robert Burns's home because he was in what was called a continual state of spring cleaning. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I guess Ellisland is quite a small place, so I don't think spring cleaning would take that long. But he seemed to think so, and essentially speaking, that was his sort of character. John Grierson was this sort of larger than life he was a sort of troublemaker at Ellisland, and he was the people who wanted Ellisland to be run as a museum didn't get that from him, and he got into a lot of trouble about that.
I think it's quite an interesting one because the way you're speaking about it, it's sort of the lovable, like, mischievous
it's
guy.
sort of the Burns.
Yeah,
it's the same sort of Burns kind of.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. But I also think that it's funny because of the fact that if we were transported back to that time, you probably wouldn't be thinking about it so jovially. Then you would be thinking that's a bit annoying. Yeah, because we would really like to have people be able to enter and have a look around and see things. So yeah, just cool with nostalgia. It's quite interesting.
What was his authority? What was his jurisdiction? How come he could send people away?
He lived in the farmhouse. So he was like the kind of
what's his
tenant.
house?
The tenant. Yeah. Well, it's like he leases it from whoever. Trying to figure out the history of like landlords, proprietors, and like tenants at Edison is like really complicated because it's like some people own the land and then some people own the farm and then they rent it. It's just kind of confusing. John Grierson is like quite an endearing character in what Logan was saying. Like it is a funny story, but also when we were doing the kind of research into it, mainly you, to be fair, we kind of discovered that also his mum had lived there before him and she had died there. So what you were saying, James, about how it's a bit, it can have like serious connotations of like, you know, he lived there, then the new trust took over, turned it into a museum, and then he's then meant to permit visitors into his home where his mum died and stuff like that. So I
think in the minutes it actually says that when the new trust takes over, that he was allowed to stay because obviously he'd been there before, and that was why he was basically kept there and sort of tolerated, I guess. But a lot of these sort of stories about him, and you can find in the minutes of Ellisland, there's a lot talked about, you know, the trust finding him very difficult to work with, and quite obviously because his mum was there before him, it's quite a difficult situation to work around without being sort of intrusive.
No, it's like this kind of battle between this kind of new trust that's formed on behalf of like a massive grant versus this kind of guy who just wants to protect his family home, and he gets quite creative with it, to be fair to him. So it's a great story. It's probably my favorite out of them all.
I think it was fun to play on that a little bit because that's where this idea of perpetual or continuous spring cleaning, that's why we came up with this little title, summer, autumn, winter, spring cleaning. So I thought it was a cool thing to play on.
Quite hard to think of an image for that though.
It was, and we came up, like, a lot of the images are pretty simple, but I think that's what we wanted them to be, something that was impactful with not a lot of imagery actually going on. So I think that sort of explains things quite well.
I think it's
like you're not allowed to enter, and maybe it's a bit more serious than the story is, but I thought it was effective.
I mean, it's quite hard, especially if there's not really any sort of records of what a person looked like. You know, someone like specifically John Grierson, you know, be open to complete interpretation. If they do their face or whatever. So the hand is pretty. You know, it's pretty gesture saying stop.
Exactly. And that was a cool part of the whole process as well for us, was trying to figure out how we were going to go about it. So, like you say, if we were to draw a figure or we were to draw a portrait, it was like there was no photographs of these people.
Yeah.
So it was quite difficult to. We had this idea of maybe making a face, completely reimagining a face, and but I think the idea that we came up with was
I
to
think
focus.
that paints more of a picture than
of the
just giving
story.
Someone
Exactly.
a face.
Because that doesn't tell you much if we just did a face of John Grierson.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was cool. It was a fun part of the process to figure out how actually we were going to illustrate these stories.
I gotta say though, like hearing that story, like I feel like I'm on his side.
Oh yeah, 100%.
That's so annoying.
Yeah.
If someone said to me like, "Oh, buy your house now," is like gonna trust and you got to let people in, come and look around. I'm like, no.
Yeah. Was he born in Ellisland?
I don't know if he was like actually born there, but like it was his family home for quite a while.
Yeah, but the good chances are.
Yeah.
Being born in Ellisland.
Yeah.
I was born here.
I'm gonna clean here.
Cool. I guess we'll move on to the next
story, which is
McNo. One of you guys want to take over from the story?
Yeah. So this next story is about Janet McNo, who was a young teenager who went to prison twice. She was a farmhand at Ellisland, and during her time at Ellisland, she was so what she was arrested for was thievery. So she stole stockings, and was it a couple of shillings?
2 shillings.
2 shillings, yeah. And I think when she went to prison, she actually put on quite a lot of weight in the short period of time.
You're right. I forgot about that.
How did you find that out?
It was in the prison records and the when we researched her name.
Literally the number that she weighed.
Yeah,
wow.
It was noted down. Yeah.
Why would someone write that down?
No idea.
But what was that attribute to? Like, why is that important to the story?
It's not important. It's just quite an interesting. It's quite an interesting thing to note because she is quite young and she was only in there for I think was it 28 days, something like that.
Yeah. She's like in terms of kind of social status and all that kind of stuff. Janet McNo's story is like the most telling. Her mother was a pauper. I think I'm saying that right.
Yeah, right.
So not wealthy by any means at all. And it's also worth noting in terms of her weight as well. She had the role of, or what is traditionally called, an in and out girl. So they were expected to work both in the farm or out on the farm and in the farmhouse. So doing almost twice as hard the work as men, but getting paid half the wage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So quite a laborious job. So when she went to prison for a couple of days or whatever,
and she was 16 as well.
Yeah,
she was very young.
It's quite a hard task that obviously burns a lot of calories, I'm assuming. If you want to like think about it that way, but just a really interesting figure. And got arrested twice as well, which I respect. Not just once, doubled down and did it again, which is cool.
Yeah, but this is kind of like what sort of prompted our title, like it's thief with a question mark, because we're sort of like asking, did she deserve it? Like is it just a consequence of her status and who she was, or just her circumstances, which was our prompt for the title, which I think fits quite well. But again, I don't know, if people would think the same as us when we hear the story and we've got to think of interpretation. You end up kind of like thinking about that person in that time, again, like what they might look like or just what they had to go through or endure, and you end up doing kind of feeling sorry for them. Even like I was saying in the last story with John Grierson, I'm on his side.
Another thing to note on this was the fact that you spoke about the in and out girl, that being the title. Just because for each of these stories we were me and Korey decided it would be a good idea to have sort of like a subtitle for above the text, and we started it off with the idea of calling the story the in and out girl. I think, didn't we? Yeah, because it was sort of double entendre. It was like to do with her job title being an in and out girl, but also the fact that she was in and out of jail. But yeah, we didn't end up with that one, but that was all good. I think the title is, as you were speaking about, I think
we actually had that idea for all the stories. We were going to kind of think of like a question to pose to the reader, and just to get them to think about, able to query again the morals of the stories and stuff.
Cool.
And the image is pretty self-explanatory. It's she's lying down in the shadows of the prison bars, the window or door or whatever. Again, tried to figure out sort of what they might look like, but a kind of very general body shape.
Yeah.
Kind of non-specific again, but
I think Corey's been very humble because I really like that image.
Yeah.
I think it's a really, really cool image.
thank you. Took me
Yeah.
so long to figure out how to do the bars in the body, how they shadow the bars.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool image. And also just to touch on the font as well that we used for the above the images. That was Corey that actually came up with the font for those, which I think, again, there was a few iterations of it because it was actually incredibly hard to read it at the start. Like,
Well,
you just couldn't read it.
Yeah, the Beyond Burns looked like Beyond Bums.
I can see that.
Yeah, we really had to change that as much as we could. But again, tried to go quite modern with it, because and obviously one that we could sort of call our own as well, to try and make the zine as completely original as we could.
Yeah, and that was another thing that was completely new because you'd not really.
No, I'd never done calligraphy before. And, you can probably tell. But no, again, sort of inspired by sort of graffiti writing, and like just because that always, as soon as you think of modern, you think, oh, graffiti.
Yeah. As soon as you think of Burns, you think graffiti.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Next
story.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so here we go. Burns and Moran.
The story of Burns and Moran is really cool because basically when Burns was leaving Ellisland, he'd become completely disillusioned with farming life and that kind of thing. He kind of had a love-hate relationship with Ellisland, more hate towards the end. So he left Ellisland in 1791, I believe that's right. And on his way out, he basically had a kind of dispute with the incoming tenant, John Moran of Lagan, I believe. And basically, Moran refused to pay Burns for his excess manure that was left over. This is kind of like, it could be true. I don't know if there's any actual hardcore evidence. There's a couple, but not. Yeah.
It's on Wikipedia.
Well, then that's fact. This is undisputable. I actually wrote it on Wikipedia just for this story. It's all made up. But yeah, basically after the dispute, Burns was quite enraged. He's quite a irrational or erratic person, probably both. And he got his brother-in-law, Adam Armour, to come and smash all the windows and the window panes in Ellisland. And if you're kind of expert Burnsian, you would know that he writes on window panes quite a lot. He does it all the time. There's one in the Globe, there's one in our collection at Ellisland, and there's a few in Alloway.
That was with a sort of metal stylus,
diamond stylus. Yeah, it's actually pretty sick. But yeah, that, I think at the time he knew how much his value of his poetry would be. He'd been to Edinburgh, he'd come back. He was quite a successful poet at this time, despite it not, translating into monetary value. So yeah, he gets his brother-in-law, supposedly, to come and smash all the window panes in Ellisland, as this kind of double act of smashing window panes is quite inconvenient for the incoming tenant, but also losing that value of Burns's poetry as well. So cool story, pretty radical, I suppose. And that's why I put it in.
Yeah, I thought it was a really cool story.
I was really excited about that. Yeah. Trying to think of an image for that.
Yeah, I think what you landed on, because this is Corey's one. You talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, kind of only just now hearing the story, I kind of only considered the fact that you can smash a window not by throwing something through it, but also just hitting it with a stick or something. I went for the projectile route, and
that's the coolest way.
To try to research what windows look like after something like a brick or stones thrown through it. Actually, the window kind of remains mostly intact. There's actually just a hole in it, which is quite surprising.
Which wouldn't be the most powerful image, probably just a hole in a window.
Yeah, no, if I don't know how you do a window pane with no glass in it. What that would look like. So yeah, I'm happy with it, and actually, it's quite similar to the layout of the Janet McNoll one, which is lying on the floor. And I actually thought again, as quite a theme I was going to do for all the images was a sort of shadow, sort of, or a spotlight being cast,
like a silhouette.
Yeah, silhouette, and usually have some sort of symbolism, being casting a shadow of if it was I think the original idea for this one was Burns or a hand giving another hand money, money paying them.
I think what we thought after that the reason we didn't go with that was because it was full hands and feet already.
Yeah, it was like so
Just
many
more
hands and just like so complicated to try to figure out. And yeah, it was a lot going on. So I think that's when we decided the simpler the better.
Yeah, for sure. I think actually the first thing before that even was this idea, because this is when we were really figuring out that actually simplicity is going to probably be king here, was actually to have like an image, like a zoomed out image of Ellisland with somebody throwing a stone or
like
something,
a lot going on.
And I think we just sort of quickly understood that that's just too much for, like, we just don't need that much.
Yeah, it's always very natural though.
Yeah.
Like, you always think of everything that's included in that story, and you think, oh, I've got to. If you're an illustrator or artist, you've got to include everything in that one picture.
Yeah.
But actually, you can zoom right in onto one element of the story, and it actually makes whoever's reading the story or sees a picture more curious about the rest of the details of the story.
It's suggestive. It's not.
Yeah.
You're not telling them this. You're not giving them all the details.
Yeah.
You're making them think about it by looking at this image.
Exactly.
Might have loads of different ways of.
I mean,
thinking about it.
Within the context of the layout of the zine, it hopefully leads them to the next page to actually read the story as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Want to talk about anything else to do with that?
I think we covered the story.
That covers
the
it.
yeah. Next one.
Yeah, go for it.
What is the next one? Next one is Macmillan.
Yeah.
This is more you. I feel this is definitely.
The Sockless Soldier, William Macmillan, who was, his relation to Ellisland is that he was a farmhand, and he worked to one of the Taylor family, who I believe will be coming up in one of the future stories. And what we found about him was when he left Ellisland, he went to work in the tea trade, and he didn't stick at that for a while, and then he ended up working. He went off to the Crimean War after that, and he led quite an interesting life. And his efforts in the war are actually documented in a diary, which you can actually buy online. The Diary of Sergeant W. Macmillan, and it's got all these details about the battles that he fought and basically his experience, which is quite a rare piece of history, because not a lot of soldiers in the Crimean War would have documented their experiences. So it's quite a very interesting thing to know that someone from Ellisland actually also had this really sort of interesting life in another context in other parts of the world.
Yeah, you must have been buzzing when you found that.
Absolutely.
Did you know about that before doing the research?
Well, I found it in the research, and I was basically just researching his name, and by chance I came across that there was this.
You're like, oh, great!
And I thought, oh well, this can't be true. This has got to be just some other guy called William Macmillan, but actually it was the real guy.
That's fantastic. And is that? I'm guessing that's where you found out all about the sock, like
so the story goes that he went in that entire winter during the war without his socks.
Was he? I'm guessing he was a bit annoyed about
that. I would be.
Did he not specifically talk about how he was feeling about that in the diary?
He would have done. Yeah.
He kind of. I haven't read it all. What he talks about quite a lot is his kind of wife or his fiance back home, and he kind of reflects about how much he hates where he is, and that probably ties into the fact that he has no socks. And he kind of reminisces of that being back home
and having socks.
Which would, fair enough.
He lost his socks because they were stolen, which I find quite funny. But I guess maybe someone else had lost their socks. I guess there was a sock thievery pandemic going on.
Stolen from another soldier,
probably,
presumably.
Yeah.
It's pretty like that resource is just so cool, because it's not just it's his inner his own thoughts about how things are going. That's invaluable as a resource now. That's well cool.
So does Ellisland hold a copy of that, or is that just your personal?
We bought a copy.
We do have a copy. It's just kind of like a paperback thing. It's not anything like.
Where's the original?
No idea.
I think it's possibly there's a museum.
Is it the Coldstream Guards?
The Coldstream Guards.
Yeah.
I think they might have it.
Okay.
So that was the kind of regiment
of the Scots Guards.
Yes.
I think.
I don't really know. Much about it, but
cool.
It's interesting. I think just one other point on Macmillan. A lot of the stories focus around in and around Ellisland and around Dumfries, for example. Janet goes to Dumfries prison, that kind of thing. this story is really interesting because you can track his movements from Ellisland, then completely global, which was really interesting. I did like a little map to pinpoint where he goes. He goes to Malta, then he goes like kind of through into what would be like Istanbul, that kind of places now.
That's right.
Which is like just from Ellisland all the way down and out. At that time in the world was just quite interesting as well. So.
Yeah, because there's nobody else apart from him that you've got that much
No,
I don't think so.
massive
There's
information.
a lot of information,
Yeah.
but I think the whole missing socks thing was the
The one that really stuck.
stuck out. Yeah, it really stuck out. I think it's because that in terms of like translating that into the zine, the images that came through your head, that was the thing that sticks out. Like someone's getting the socks stolen, or
And Janet Manu, of course, also stole socks.
Yeah, lots of stuff.
Common Ellisland theme.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I mean, like, do you want to talk about it? Like you did?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the illustration for this one.
Yeah,
this was on my ones. So yeah, I guess we've already kind of spoken about it, but that was definitely the focus. It was quite obvious from the start that we wanted that to be I think that was like, this was maybe the first idea that we actually had for it. It was one of the first images that either of us came up with. I think there was a draft before that, and then that was kind of final one. But yeah, it's cool, and I like drawing, like that's what I'm used to doing. I'm used to drawing figures and portraits, and not feet specifically. I don't think I've just drawn a picture of feet. Yeah, but it was really fun, and I do enjoy drawing that sort of image. So yeah, it was cool.
It's good.
I mean, before we decided who was going to draw what, this is the first thing you kind of drew.
Yeah.
It was a pair of feet, and like specifically a pair of feet that looked cool.
Yeah, and kind of like
hard to
uglyish
do.
as well, feet, because they can't be pretty feet.
Well, they would have went for a lot.
They need to be calloused and ugly and like hairy and stuff.
Always frozen. Like my idea was to have someone literally pinching the socks half off the foot, which was again quite hard to draw. But yeah, very happy with what James has done.
That's really good.
Cool. The next one,
Taylor family.
So the Taylor family, that might be it. So the Taylor family doesn't make it into the zine purely because it's a really interesting kind of dynasty of ownership from about 100 years.
Yes.
And maybe in hindsight, it would have been good to put it in.
But there's not really one pinpointed story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We wanted to focus on people specifically.
That's right. Yeah.
So we didn't give it to you guys in the brief. I don't think I did anyway.
I think that was maybe one of the ones that when I went on the website to look, that was maybe there.
Yeah. It was just because it was such a long period of time, and then condensing that into one image, I thought maybe wasn't relevant. In hindsight, it might have been, but I guess that's part of the creative process of making mistakes.
Yeah.
The last page we've got about the sponsors. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean the funders. I mean they're all really great, and they all massively help. So the Hollywood Trust, which actually pays for my wage, so they're my favourite. But Museum Gallery Scotland, Historic Environmental Scotland, and the People's Postcode Lottery all supported the entire project. So that's from the exhibition to kind of hosting events, all part of this kind of Burns, Barnes and Byers project, which kind of lasted the previous 6 months. And that ranges from events, the zine, buying new display cases. It was a whole big redevelopment kind of thing. And it was great to be part of. Obviously, some things I would change if I redid it again and that kind of thing, but that's just, it's my first time, I should say, as well, doing anything like this, taking the lead on an exhibition and trying to tie in kind of smaller projects as well. So yeah, it's a really interesting, good learning experience.
Definitely.
And it was great to be part of it as well.
Cool.
And
Will we maybe go around and just like speak about like how we found the whole thing? Like you can maybe go next, just like what you felt you got out of it. Blah, blah, blah.
So doing the research, I found it like very fascinating that there was so much more to Burns at Ellisland than just Burns, if that makes sense. Because Ellisland is sort of, when you visit the museum, it's sort of it's all about these 3 years that Robert Burns stayed at Ellisland, which is a very short period of time, and fair enough, it was very important to Burns' life. But there is so much more to Ellisland than just the Burns side of it, and just finding out all these little interesting things. It's quite interesting how much it's not just people, but it's the stories that behind the people, which are very interesting. There's so much to the place. You know, I mean, you wouldn't really think, if you didn't do the research, you wouldn't know that someone had went off to the Crimean War, or someone had you know, been jailed twice for stealing. It's quite they're very interesting stories that are they sort of they play to the sort of Burns trope of this sort of everyman, which is something that I really took from it all. But doing the research, it was just like a really cool process, and sometimes it was frustrating because you would find something and it wouldn't be true, or it wouldn't match up, or you couldn't find something that could prove it, or there was always little difficulties, but it was a really great process overall.
Yeah, that would be tough. Try to figure out what's true and what's not true. I can just say from my point of view, it was obviously great to do something that I've never done before in terms of illustration, like working on an actual publication, I suppose you can call it, as a zine. I should also maybe shout out to Jamie Striker,
for sure,
because she had helped James and I format the whole thing basically digitally. Because again, this is the first time we had done this. We never sort of formatted anything for printing out for a booklet, I suppose. So big shout out to her.
Yeah, I don't think we could have actually done it without, like, although it was just, we needed that little bit of guidance.
What was funny was that she was telling us, like, it's really easy, but when you don't know, you really don't know. So to us it was a bit alien, but yeah, Jamie really helped us out with that. And yeah, I think just great opportunity. Very grateful for this to be like my first go as well. And I know like things go wrong, but you know, it's not drastic. It's still a really good zine. I loved the stories. I loved the history behind it all. I think one of the stories that was always surprising was this window panes getting smashed in. Like that always is just like quite an interesting story. Just like someone could be so. I mean, like Burns is kind of like a celebrity around Dumfries. I mean, like there's a statue of him. You know, it's just like everyone kind of like knows who Burns is in Dumfries, and just to have him sort of painted out almost like not like a villain, but like in the context of that story, it's kind of like, you know, I guess the whole morals comes into it again. I think that I like stories that makes you question. I don't know, maybe like your initial beliefs about a person, especially someone so where the history's so rich of him in Dumfries. Yeah. Like I said, a local celebrity almost. Yeah.
Was just touching on what you spoke about, obviously the research into all of these stories. In what capacity was this explored before? Like, was it explored in any capacity?
Not at all. Apart from the Burns and Moran story, which was kind of like a bit folklore-y. The rest of it was, you know, fair play to Logan, and also our kind of director Joan took the lead on all these stories really. And I should say that there's so many more. Like there'll be loads to find out. And that's a really exciting project that, you know, might come in the future.
Cool.
That'd be great,
Yeah, and just my kind of general thoughts on it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And again, for me, it was, as we've spoken about before, it was the first time I'd ever had, to be fair, it was the first time I've ever had a commission. Like, because I'm really quite new to this whole creative world, and this is like my first job really in the creative sector. So to be given this opportunity quite early on, with someone like Korey, who's super talented at what he does. And like, that was, as I say, one of the first opportunities I was given since being at the stove. It was, just super, super exciting. I don't know, I think it taught me a lot about what I want to do as well in general, because although I really, really enjoyed this, I don't know if after having this experience, it's something I'm going to rush into doing again, or at least not in the same role of completely producing it with the help of the physical thing itself I'm talking about, not the text or the research or the editing, but having that much of a role and an involvement in it. I think I wouldn't rush into doing that again. I would probably definitely do some sort of illustration again, but that was why it was partly valuable to me as a kind of learning experience for what I want to do, or I'm prepared to do in the future as well. So but yeah, the whole thing was super, super fun.
It was fun.
Yeah.
Partially because we were sort of like running after ourselves, because it was the first time. It was very exciting, and like I said, I love the stories as well.
Yeah. And how is it that time moves so quickly when there's a deadline? Like, that was. Like, what happens there? Like, It was scary how quickly that came about. But
probably just before we sign off as well, just to kind of note that it's been great working with you guys at the Stove. I think it's a really kind of impressive and progressive kind of institution in Dumfries, which is something that Dumfries needs. I remember when Joan introduced me to like the concept of the Stove, I was kind of like, and I chatted to Matt. I thought it was great, and just really happy to work with you guys, and hopefully kind of can work together in the future at some stage if there's another project and that kind of thing. That was great.
It's good. It's cool to see that sort of actualized as well, because the something that was quite exciting about working here and managing to get this role was this idea of building like a network of creatives or creative organizations, this, like the fact that we're doing this podcast right now is pretty cool, because it's that in real life. It's literally us connecting, coming together and talking about what we've managed to create together. So
definitely,
and as well, it sets it up for the fact that there's loads more research to be done. It sets that up kind of perfectly as well for the future.
I'd like to say that without the Stove, I wouldn't have probably been involved with this project, because obviously I did Creative Spaces last year, so I'm not actually. I don't work for the Stove anymore. I'm like a freelance illustrator, but I still was offered this role through the Stove. So the Stove, it just really does cater to sort of, I would say, any sort of like creative sole trader that isn't very well established yet. I'm in my first year of being a freelance illustrator, and to get an opportunity like this as a commission is just fantastic, and I'm really grateful for it.
Cool. I guess we'll sign off then.
Is that us?
Sweet.